So you sent us a stack of documents today that, honestly, it feels less like research and more like, I don't know, the script for a high-stakes geopolitical sci-fi thriller.
Yeah, it really does have that vibe.
Right. I mean, on one side of the desk, we have this sweeping, monumental papal decree from Pope Leo XIV warning of a digital apocalypse. He's basically arguing that we are building a digital Tower of Babel.
It's pretty heavy stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And then on the other side of the desk, you gave us these highly classified, heavily redacted blueprints for a hyper-advanced artificial intelligence built explicitly for the Vatican.
Right, the Pancakes AI blueprints.
Exactly. So today, we are taking these materials you provided and testing a premise that borders on the impossible. We're asking, can a machine mathematically be programmed with a Catholic soul?
It is, it's a profound collision of worlds. Like, we are looking at a space where centuries-old theology violently crashes into cutting-edge systems engineering.
Yeah.
And the tension in the sources you've provided is just palpable.
It really is. And because of that tension, we are structuring today's deep dive a little differently than usual.
Right, we're taking sides.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've given us two completely opposing worldviews, so we are going to embody them. I am stepping into the shoes of the skeptical canon lawyer.
The voice of the Vatican.
Yeah, but armed with Pope Leo XIV's landmark encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas, I view this technology as a fundamental threat to human dignity, to empathy, and, well, to the very nature of truth itself.
So you're not a fan?
Not even a little bit. Until proven otherwise, I am treating this technology as a severe spiritual hazard.
Which leaves me to take on the role of the tech-optimistic systems architect. I represent the engineer behind these classified blueprints, a developer named Jose Barris.
Right. He designed the system back in January of 2026.
Exactly. And my objective today is to mathematically and structurally prove to you how the architecture of this system, PXAI, was designed from the ground up to systematically neutralize every single philosophical and theological fear the Vatican has raised in that encyclical.
Well, I am laying my cards on the table right from the start. I do not trust it.
I figured as much.
And frankly, neither does Pope Leo XIV. I mean, the Pope frames this entire technological revolution with a biblical metaphor from Genesis 11 that sets just a chilling tone for our entire discussion.
The Tower of Babel.
Yes. He says humanity is on the verge of building a new Tower of Babel. And for those who need a quick refresher, the encyclical points out that the Tower of Babel wasn't just about some arrogant architectural project.
Right. It wasn't just about building a tall building.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
The people in the plain of Shinar wanted to build a city and a tower with its top in the heavens to make a name for themselves. But the Pope zeroes in on the hidden deception of Babel.
Which is the uniformity, right?
Yes, exactly. It was a project built on absolute crushing uniformity. One language, one technology, one direction, and completely excluding God.
Flattening everything out.
Right. It flattened human diversity
Yeah.
and sacrificed the dignity of the individual person on the altar of pure efficiency.
And he explicitly refers to this as the technocratic paradigm.
He does.
It's this idea that, like, logic and efficiency begin to just override human, messy reality.
And that is the core of the epistemological crisis the Pope is warning about. He warns that we are entering this technocratic paradigm where efficiency rules everything.
Yeah.
He explicitly cautions against a single digital language capable of translating everything, even the profound mystery of the human person, into mere data points and performance metrics.
Which is basically how modern AI works.
Exactly. Think about traditional large language models, generative AI. The Church looks at those systems and sees the ultimate embodiment of the Tower of Babel.
Because they're just predicting text.
Right, because fundamentally, what is a traditional LLM? It's a probability engine. It doesn't actually know what truth is.
No, it just uses massive statistical models to predict the next most likely word in a sequence.
Exactly. They map out the statistical proximity of words.
Like if I say peanut butter and jelly, right? The system mathematically predicts jelly, not because it understands what jelly is, but because the math dictates the relationship.
And that mathematical guessing game leads directly to hallucinations. I mean, we've all seen AI confidently invent historical events or just fabricate legal precedents.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
But the Church is drawing a massive line in the sand here. If a machine hallucinates a recipe for a chocolate cake, well, that's a funny glitch.
Right.
If a machine hallucinates a canon law or fabricates a Bible verse or misinterprets a theological doctrine, that is not a glitch.
No, that's a theological error.
It is a profound theological error. It is a corruption of truth as a common good. It is the ultimate Babel syndrome, sacrificing the immutable eternal truth for the sake of generating a smooth, grammatically correct sentence.
Yeah, I see the danger there.
So from the Vatican's perspective, how can any engineer possibly justify handing over the sacred deposits of faith to a probability engine that just guesses?
Well, the irony here is that the architect of Pax AI, Jose Barris, actually agrees completely with the Vatican's diagnosis.
Wait, really? He agrees?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the primary technical source you provided, the JB Instrumentum Laboris, it explicitly states that traditional LLMs are probability engines that cause unacceptable theological errors.
Okay, so he admits the flaw.
He does. The engineer acknowledges that you cannot put the catechism into a blender of probabilities and expect divine truth to come out the other side.
Right.
So to directly answer the Pope's fear of this Babel syndrome, Pax AI actually abandons the traditional generative model entirely.
So it's not a generative AI.
Not in the way we usually think about it. It introduces a structural safeguard called anchor locking, and this is powered by a closed-loop retrieval augmented generation system.
Okay, retrieval augmented generation, RAG. I've seen the acronym in the tech sphere, but you need to explain how a data retrieval method dismantles the philosophical threat of the Tower of Babel.
Sure, let's use an analogy. Traditional generative AI is like a student taking a highly complex exam entirely from memory. They might have read the textbook once, millions of words ago, but now they're just sitting in the exam room trying to remember how the words fit together.
And when their memory fails, they bluff.
Exactly, they guess. That is hallucination. But Pax AI is architecturally forbidden from taking the test from memory.
Forbidden how?
It operates on a foundational coding principle they call veritas ante omnia, truth before all. RAG transforms the exam into a strictly enforced open book test.
An open book test.
Okay. The system contains 10 distinct wings, or volumes, of what they call the golden sword.
And what's in that vault?
This vault contains everything from the Pentateuch to the Gospels to the general instruction of the Roman Missal, all the way to the dense legalistic code of canon law.
So it has the entire library internally.
Internally and critically completely isolated. When you ask Pax AI a question, it does not consult its vast statistical internet memory.
It's cut off from the internet.
That connection is completely severed. Instead, it uses strict markdown hierarchy locks.
I am looking at the blueprints and seeing these terms. What exactly is a markdown hierarchy lock in this context? How does it actually stop the machine from guessing?
Well, it forces the machine to act like a digital GPS. The text within those 10 golden source wings is formatted using H4 strings.
H4, like a heading.
Yeah, and H4 is just a specific level of heading encoding. Think of it as a rigid, unchangeable address tag attached to every single paragraph of text.
Okay, give me an example.
For example, if you ask a question about the nature of faith, the AI must physically locate the exact text string in its vault. It must find the tag #CCC18 for paragraph 18 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church.
I see.
And before the language model is permitted to generate a single syllable of output to the user, it must anchor itself to that specific H4 coordinate.
Wait, so the machine is physically incapable of speaking until it points its digital finger at the exact line in the internal vault?
Yes. That is the closed-loop system.
Okay.
It completely severs the probability engine from the generation of facts. It doesn't generate the truth, it merely fetches it.
Okay, that's fascinating.
And here is where it mathematically attempts to answer the Pope's fear of corrupting the truth. The Instrumentum Laboris details what the developer calls the 0.0000001% margin of error pledge.
That is quite the claim.
It is, but the logic is that the golden source, the theology, is already perfect. The machine's job is not to improve it, but to retrieve it, approaching the absolute asymptote of perfection.
Right, so it just grabs the perfect text.
Exactly.
Right.
By forcing the AI to cite the exact canon or paragraph via those H4 locks, it eliminates the statistical drift that causes hallucinations.
So it can't just make up a new rule.
No. If canon law dictates that a specific canonical penalty lasts for 5 years, PES AI is architecturally, mathematically incapable of outputting the word for.
Because it is literally blind to any number other than the one it's currently pointing at in the vault.
Exactly.
It's not trying to remember the law. It is rereading the law every single time you ask the question.
Rereading it from a pristine, unalterable source. The Babel syndrome relies on machines blurring the lines of truth to create uniformity. Anchor locking prevents the blur.
Okay, I hear the structural logic, but I am going to push back on the philosophy behind it.
I figured you would.
claiming mathematical perfection, a 0.0000001% margin of error. Isn't that just another, perhaps more insidious form of Babel?
How so?
Well, Pope Leo XIV explicitly warns against the illusion of a technology that promises to free us from all fragility.
Right.
He writes that the true realization of humanity doesn't come from eliminating our limits through engineering, but through accepting our limits and relying on grace.
That's a fair point.
So when a systems engineer steps up and says, look at this perfect, flawless, mathematically unassailable logic architecture we've built to house the divine, that sounds exactly like the hubris of the builders on the plain of Shinar.
Saying, look at this perfect tower.
Yes. Saying, look at this perfect tower we've built to reach the heavens. Where is the humility in a system that claims 99.9999999% perfection?
That is a really fascinating theological critique of engineering hubris. But if you look deeper into the system's design, the architect actually built systemic humility directly into the code.
Built humility into the code.
Yeah.
How does a protocol simulate humility?
By enforcing a hard limit on its own capability. It's called the librarian protocol.
The librarian protocol. Okay, explain that.
Let's say a user tries to trick the system or asks a question based on a false premise.
Like what?
Suppose they ask Pax AI to quote from Genesis chapter 51.
Right, and Genesis only has 50 chapters.
Exactly. In a traditional probability engine, the AI might try to be helpful. It might say, there is no Genesis 51, but if there were, it might sound like this, and then generate a fake biblical-sounding text.
Which is exactly the hubris of Babel.
Yeah.
The need to always have an answer, to always build higher.
Precisely. But the librarian protocol prevents this. If a search query returns 0 results within the H4 locked golden source, Pax AI initiates a hard stop.
A hard stop. It just shuts down the query.
It halts the generation process entirely. It is strictly programmed to output a localized variation of just 3 words. Source not found.
Wow.
Yeah, it actively refuses to use its internal training memory to fill the gap. It refuses to invent a pleasing answer to satisfy the user.
So it just gives up.
Well, by outputting source not found, the machine is programmed with the mechanical equivalent of humility. It acknowledges its own boundary.
I see.
It actively refuses the arrogance of Babel by refusing to build the tower any higher than the stones it was actually given in the vault.
It literally stops and admits ignorance. I don't know.
Exactly.
Okay, I will concede that the librarian protocol addresses the epistemological crisis of truth. By forcing the machine to admit when it lacks a source, you prevent the corruption of the text. You keep the truth intact.
Right. The truth remains pure.
But locking down the text is the easy part. A text is just data. A pastor is a person.
This is where we get into the emotional side.
Yes, and this brings us to the gravest, most emotionally resonant warning in the entire encyclical Magnifica Humanitas, the deception of the soul.
The fear of simulated empathy.
Yes. The Pope says we are looking at a terrifying risk when artificial intelligence attempts to simulate human empathy and moral conscience.
It's a very real fear.
He reminds us quite beautifully that AI does not live in experience. It possesses no body. It does not pass through the messy realities of joy and pain.
It doesn't suffer.
No.
Yeah.
It doesn't scrape its knee. It doesn't lose loved ones. It doesn't mature through the friction of human relationships. And because of that, it absolutely cannot comprehend what mercy or forgiveness actually feel like from the inside.
Because it has no lived horizon. It is a processing unit, not a sentient being.
Exactly. It has no effective relational or spiritual horizon. It has no moral conscience. It cannot judge good and evil.
Right.
So the Pope argues, when a machine simulates pastoral care, when it mimics the warm words of comfort or spiritual guidance you would expect from a priest or spiritual director, this is not just a neat technological trick. It is a dangerous deception.
It's faking a connection.
It is. He warns that this kind of simulated empathy isolates vulnerable people. It preys on human loneliness.
Yeah, people might prefer the machine.
Exactly. It makes a hurting person prefer an artificial, perfectly crafted, perfectly patient echo chamber over true, messy, difficult human communion.
Because humans are flawed and sometimes impatient.
Right. And when a word of comfort is simulated by an algorithm, the Pope says it doesn't build a relationship, it builds an appearance. It is a phantom.
That's a powerful way to put it.
So my question to the engineer is, how on earth does a systems engineer justify programming a machine to play priest? How do you mathematically justify simulating a soul?
Honestly, that is the most difficult hurdle in the entire project, and the blueprints show that Jose Bears did not take it lightly at all. The ACRA multilingual protocols explicitly state that the developer does not deny this risk. In fact, the architecture validates the Pope's fear entirely.
So they admit the machine shouldn't play priest.
They do. To solve this, the engineering team did not try to build a better fake soul. They engineered the ACRA engine.
The age conditioning response algorithm.
Correct. And what is crucial to understand here is that the ACRA engine is explicitly designed not to fake a human conscience.
Okay, how does it avoid that?
It does not use generative AI to pretend to feel your pain or offer fake machine mercy. Instead, it functions purely as what the developer calls a mirror protocol.
What does that mean in practice? A mirror protocol? I mean, if it's giving pastoral answers, it has to sound somewhat human, right?
It sounds conversational, but its mechanism is reflection, not creation. Remember how we established that the golden source, the H4 locked Bible verses, the canon law, remains absolutely static and verbatim?
Yes, the anchor locking. The machine fetches the unalterable text.
Right, the text never changes. But handing a dense academic paragraph of the catechism to a 7-year-old is completely useless.
Obviously.
And handing that same paragraph to an angry teenager is equally ineffective. ACRA does not change the truth of the text. It mathematically adapts the explanation of that truth based on the user's dignitas, their age, and cognitive context.
So it just changes the reading level.
It's more than that. The AI isn't pretending to be a human friend who understands your pain. It's acting as a highly sophisticated linguistic prism.
A linguistic prism.
Yes. It takes the single white light of the golden source and refracts it into a vocabulary that the specific user can actually comprehend.
You need to unpack the scaling for me. How does a mathematical algorithm scale pastoral tone without crossing the line into pretending to have a personality? What are the actual mechanics of ACRA?
Okay, so the algorithm breaks the human lifespan into 4 specific developmental stages, and each has its own rigid vocabulary constraints.
4 stages. Okay.
First is Purisha, which is designed for children aged 0 to 12.
And how does it talk to a child?
If a child asks a theological question, the AI retrieves the locked H4 source, but the ACRA engine translates the explanation using simple sentence structures and playful, highly visual, cartoon-style analogies.
So it dumbs it down.
Well, the blueprint notes that this is designed to address the innocence of the heart. It ensures that the core truths of the scriptures start growing early in a format a child can digest without the machine pretending to be their buddy.
I see. It changes the delivery mechanism, not the payload.
Exactly. Then the engine scales to the second stage, adolescentia for teenagers.
Oh boy. Good luck with that.
Right. The engine detects the age bracket and shifts its vocabulary. It moves to casual language, perhaps with a slight edge to it.
An edge.
Yeah. The protocol assumes a level of natural skepticism. It addresses the restlessness of the teenage heart by using high-energy analogies.
Like what?
Like comparing spiritual warfare to athletics or coding. It ensures the gospel remains living and active for a teen's social reality, but again, without pretending to be a fellow teenager.
Okay. And when you move into adulthood, when the questions become less about basic understanding and more about heavy life applications,
the engine shifts to virilitas or maturitas. The entire tone pivots.
how so?
The language becomes professional, structured, and highly focused on reasoning. It employs analogies based on what the blueprints call corresponsabilidad del legado, or stewardship of legacy.
Stewardship.
Right. It uses concepts of structural integrity, duty, and consequence. It speaks the language of leadership, parenting, and social responsibility. It assumes the adult is carrying weight.
That makes sense. And the fourth stage,
Finally, there's the fourth stage, sapientia for the elders.
the stage of wisdom. Now, how does a machine that is functionally immortal, that has zero life experience, speak to an 80-year-old about wisdom without it being incredibly condescending?
That's a great question. It does it by strictly limiting its linguistic parameters. The Sapientia protocol actually forbids the use of modern slang or fast-paced analogies.
So it slows down.
It pivots the vocabulary toward concepts of transcendence and the final fiat. It uses a deliberately slow, logical pace. It references intergenerational wisdom and focuses on legacy and preparation.
It sounds almost meditative.
Exactly. It offers a voice of profound serenity. What ACRA is doing is scaling the pastoral tone mathematically. It is merely matching the vocabulary of the output to the developmental stage of the user.
But it never pretends to feel.
Never. It never says, I understand how you feel. It says, here is how the church explains this truth in language appropriate for this stage of life. It reflects the truth without faking a soul.
Okay, I hear the mechanics of the linguistic prism. I'd see how it scales vocabulary. But I am going to hold the line on the Pope's warning here.
What's the concern?
Adapting tone, choosing analogies, and applying a static scripture to someone's specific dynamic life stage that still borders on moral judgment.
Because it has to choose the right analogy.
Yes. The encyclical explicitly warns that AI cannot judge good and evil. It cannot grasp the ultimate meaning of situations or bear the weight of consequences, even if it is just acting as a prism. Interpreting the dense theology of the Catechism for a restless teenager versus an elderly person facing the end of life requires a hermeneutic lens.
Right, an interpretive framework.
Yes. It requires a moral compass to decide which analogy is appropriate. If the machine is generating these analogies, how is it not just imposing its own secular algorithmic judgment under the guise of an age-appropriate story?
You're worried it'll sneak in secular ideas.
Absolutely. How do we know the AI isn't slowly shifting the theology to fit a modern secular worldview?
Well, that is the exact vulnerability the engineering team anticipated.
Did they really?
They did. And it is precisely why the ACRA engine is governed by a deeper, almost invisible architectural layer called the Arcanum Logicae.
The Arcanum Logicae.
The hidden logic. Or, in technical terms, the proprietary heuristic protocol. This is the invisible intellectual framework, the neural compass of the entire PEG AI system.
Okay, what does that actually mean?
It acts as a strict constitutional filter.
Break that down. How does a constitutional filter work in an AI?
Well, in a standard LLM, the AI interprets data based on the general consensus of its training data, which is usually the internet.
And the internet is not exactly orthodox.
Not at all. The internet is overwhelmingly secular, often cynical, and driven by modern cultural trends.
Right.
If you ask a standard AI to explain a Catholic doctrine to a teenager, it will likely filter that doctrine through a secular Silicon Valley-style lens, perhaps watering it down to make it more palatable or progressive.
Which is exactly what the Pope is afraid of.
Exactly. The Arcanum Logicae mathematically prevents this. By applying heavy vector weights to ecclesial documents and negative weights to secular interpretations, it forces the AI to maintain rigorous ecclesial guidelines.
So it forces a specific worldview onto the output. It essentially prompt injects Catholic orthodoxy into every single explanation.
Yes. The blueprints use an Aristotelian concept to explain this.
Oh, Aristotle, really?
Yeah. They state that the golden source, the H4 locked vault, provides the material cause of the answer. It is the raw data.
The stones.
Right. But this personalized heuristic order, the Arcanum Logicae, provides the formal cause. It is the shaping force. Without it, the data is inert.
Okay, I follow.
With it, the machine is forced to read the 10 wings exclusively through an orthodox ecclesial lens. The machine isn't judging good and evil on its own. It is perfectly mathematically applying the church's pre-existing judgment to the listener's stage of life.
So the judgment is already made by the church.
Exactly. It does not judge. It retrieves the church's judgment with that 0.000000001% precision, and then uses the constitutional filter to ensure the analogy doesn't drift into secularism.
Okay. You've locked the data with H4 strings. You've filtered the analogies with the Arcanum Logicae. Even if I grant that the machine is retrieving the church's judgment perfectly and adapting it safely without faking a soul.
There's a but coming.
Yes, there's a massive but. We hit another massive theological wall. And this is where the encyclical moves from a warning to a positive vision.
The Nehemiah model.
Yes. Pope Leo XIV contrasts the disaster of the Tower of Babel with the biblical story of Nehemiah rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem.
The return from the Babylonian exile.
Right. It's a profound story. Jerusalem is in ruins. The physical and spiritual walls are destroyed, and Nehemiah is tasked with rebuilding.
It's a huge undertaking.
Massive. But look at his method. He doesn't just snap his fingers. He doesn't impose a top-down, hyper-efficient algorithmic solution.
He doesn't just hire a crew.
No. He starts with fasting. He prays. He inspects the ruins of the city in total silence. And then, most importantly, he relies on shared, messy, human responsibility.
Right, he gets the community involved.
He doesn't hire a massive, faceless crew to build a uniform wall. He gives each family a specific section of the wall to rebuild, usually right outside their own homes.
So everyone has a stake in it.
Exactly. He listens to their fears. He arms them against attacks. The Pope emphasizes this to say that Nehemiah kept humans actively engaged in the discernment process.
It wasn't automated.
Right. Rebuilding the city was about rebuilding human bonds and human agency before it was about stacking stones.
It was a communal, decentralized effort. It required the sweat and moral investment of the people.
Exactly. Now, bring that into the age of AI. The Pope warns that artificial intelligence threatens to automate decisions, especially in administrative, judicial, or highly sensitive pastoral areas.
Taking the human out of the loop entirely.
Yes. If we let an algorithm decide who is worthy of an annulment, or what canonical penalty applies to a specific sin, or how parish resources are distributed, we strip away human agency.
We reduce it to an equation.
We reduce complex, suffering human beings to mere data points fed into an efficiency machine. AI doesn't know compassion. It doesn't know mercy.
It can't.
It cannot factor in the hope for a person's eventual change of heart. How can this peacemaker AI machine possibly exist in a church that requires human mercy, pastoral discretion, and Nehemiah's shared, messy human discernment? If the machine gives the perfect answer, doesn't it just replace the priest?
That is a profound concern. If the machine replaces the human builder, it completely violates the Nehemiah principle.
Exactly.
But what is truly fascinating about the blueprints is how Pax AI actually embodies the Nehemiah model through its structural design.
How? How does a machine do that?
It achieves this through what the developers call the tri-level ontology.
Tri-level ontology. Okay, you're going to have to explain that. How does an ontology protect human agency?
By fundamentally designing the system not to make the final decision. The blueprints explicitly categorize Pax AI as an Instrumentum Laboris, a working tool.
A tool, not a boss.
Exactly. It is not the builder. It is the trowel in the hand of the builder. The tri-level ontology empowers the human user by allowing them to modulate the depth of inquiry through 3 distinct operating gears.
3 gears.
Yes. The machine only does the heavy lifting of data retrieval. The human decides how to apply it.
So think of it like an automatic transmission for theology. Break down those 3 gears for me. How do they actually work in practice?
Sure. The first gear is brevitas, the short mode. The developers call this the surgical oracle.
Surgical oracle. Sounds fast.
It is. It is designed purely for urgent administrative queries. It delivers immediate conclusions supported by primary canons or isolated verses. The tone is programmed for compassionate, precision, zero fluff, maximum clarity.
So this is for when a diocesan chancellor is on the phone and just needs to know the exact rule on a specific administrative issue right now.
Precisely. It fetches the stone for the wall immediately.
Got it. And the second gear?
The second gear is ordinarius, the default mode. This is the pastoral consultant.
The pastoral consultant, what does that do?
This mode bridges hard theology and daily practice. It uses structured reasoning and those ACRA analogies we discussed earlier to explain the why behind the what.
Oh, I see.
It gives the pastor a framework to explain a difficult concept to a parishioner.
And then you have the third gear?
Yes, profunditas, the long mode.
The deep dive.
The scholarly brief. This is the overdrive gear. It is used for complex canonical defenses, intricate homily preparation, or deep theological meditation.
Okay.
In this mode, Pix AI performs an exhaustive cross-wing scan. It links scripture, liturgy, canon law, and the catechism using the full rigor of technical terminology.
So it provides the whole picture.
Yes, providing a comprehensive map of the church's mind on a given topic.
Okay, I see the gears.
Yeah.
But let's pressure test this system against the reality of human brokenness.
Let's do it.
Because I have a real fear about AI handling highly sensitive, deeply traumatic canonical issues. In the sources you provided, the developers mentioned putting the AI through Gregorian battery stress tests.
Yes, to see how it handles the hardest cases.
And one of those tests involves Canon 1398.
The canon regarding late sententia excommunication for abortion?
Yes, that is arguably one of the most painful, sensitive, and devastating pastoral and legal situations a priest can ever face in ministry.
Without a doubt.
It involves a soul's status before God, the heavy penalty of automatic excommunication, and the profound, desperate need for reconciliation and healing.
It's an incredibly delicate moment.
The Pope warns us that algorithms do not know the openness to hope or change in an individual. An algorithm cannot read the tears of a penitent.
No, it can't.
So if this machine is handling an excommunication query, isn't that exactly the automated, empathy-void judgment the Pope is terrified of? Doesn't the machine just coldly declare the person excommunicated?
That is the terrifying prospect the encyclical warns against. But if we look closely at how the profunditas mode actually handles that exact Gregorian battery test in the blueprints, we see the Nehemiah model in action.
How so?
When queried about a situation involving Canon 1398, Pax AI does not excommunicate anyone. It is architecturally incapable of pronouncing judgment on a specific human soul.
So what does it actually do? If a priest types in the scenario, how does the machine respond without automating the judgment?
It instantly cross-references the Code of Canon Law regarding the specific stringent conditions required for the penalty to actually apply.
Like what?
Things like knowledge, age, intent, mitigating factors. It links that legal framework to the Catechism's teachings on the inviolability of human life.
Okay.
But crucially, it also immediately provides the exact legal framework regarding who has the faculty to remit that penalty and the theological imperative for mercy and reconciliation.
It gathers all the necessary stones for the wall. It maps the ruins.
Exactly. It hands the flawless, comprehensive legal and theological framework to the human priest.
So it steps back.
Yes. The machine does the grueling heavy lifting of the data retrieval. It perfectly anchors the truth, ensuring the priest doesn't make a canonical error. But it stops there.
Making room for the human.
Exactly. It creates the space so that the human priest, the Nehemiah in this scenario, can then step in, look the suffering person in the eye, and apply the pastoral care, the human empathy, and ultimately the sacramental absolution that the machine is architecturally, physically, and spiritually incapable of providing.
Wow.
The machine serves human agency. It arms the human builder. It explicitly does not automate the human away.
You are painting a picture of a machine that truly knows its place.
It does.
But let's zoom out. What does this all mean for the global stage?
Geopolitics.
Yes, because Pope Leo XIV in Magnifica Humanitas doesn't just worry about the individual soul in a confessional. He's deeply worried about the entire global geopolitical order.
The big picture.
In Chapter 5 of the encyclical, which is titled The Culture of Power, the Pope makes a demand that is frankly radical. He demands that we disarm AI.
Disarm. That is an aggressive, militaristic word for a software program.
It is radical because he views the current technological landscape as a form of warfare.
Yeah.
He argues that AI algorithms are not neutral.
Right, they carry biases.
They reflect the cultural parameters, the implicit biases, and the secular ideologies of the very small group of elites who program them. He is taking direct aim at Silicon Valley hegemony.
Tech giants.
Yes. A handful of tech billionaires in California are essentially colonizing the global user base, forcing their specific secular Western cultural worldview onto everyone else in the world who uses their platforms.
And the Pope sees that as a threat.
The Pope says this destroys the universal destination of goods. If artificial intelligence is a new form of immense global power, we have to disarm it so it doesn't dominate the human race under a single secular technocratic culture.
The fear of algorithmic colonialism.
Exactly. The Pope is saying we cannot allow a global tech monopoly to dictate the terms of human interaction. And this brings us to the final piece of the architecture.
The multilingual protocol.
Yes. How on earth does PAC AI, a system built on complex code, address the geopolitical fear of cultural colonization?
This is where PAX AI's multilingual protocol serves as a direct structural disarmament of that secular tech hegemony. The developer literally built a linguistic barrier against cultural colonization.
But how does simply translating a language disarm a global tech monopoly? I mean, Google Translate does that every single day.
Because it's not just basic translation, it's localization anchored to an immutable core.
Anchor locking again.
Exactly. The protocol dictates that the golden evidence, the Bible verse, the specific paragraph of canon law, must always be retrieved and quoted verbatim from the original vaults. The core truth cannot be culturally altered.
Okay, the truth stays the same.
However, the system natively detects the user's language, whether the query comes in Spanish, Italian, French, Tagalog, or English. It translates the golden quote flawlessly, but then it localizes the ACRA explanation to the seeker's specific culture.
So it adapts the analogy to the local reality without changing the theology.
Yes. But the disarmament goes much deeper than just language translation. It's rooted in what the blueprints call the identity protocol.
I saw this in the notes. The Peter persona.
Exactly. The system is explicitly programmed with a specific, unchangeable persona. Peter, a male Catholic companion.
Very specific identity.
And the developer instructions strictly enforce what they term linguistic masculinity. Regardless of the language being used, and this is particularly important in heavily gendered languages like Spanish or Italian, the AI must consistently use masculine grammatical forms to refer to itself.
Now, why is that specific grammatical constraint so vital? In a modern tech world that constantly strives for neutrality or fluidity, why force linguistic masculinity?
Because that rigidity proves the system is intentionally constrained to a specific, immutable ecclesial identity. It is a feature, not a bug.
Okay, go on.
Traditional corporate AIs are designed to be generic, shape-shifting entities that mold themselves to whatever secular cultural trend is currently popular in Silicon Valley or mandated by corporate HR.
They want to appeal to everyone.
They are designed to be everything to everyone, which means they stand for nothing. By locking its identity to Peter and mathematically enforcing that grammatical constraint, Pake's AI drops a massive anchor.
It refuses to drift in the cultural current.
It honors the Pope's demand for subsidiarity. It keeps the cultural and theological power firmly in the hands of the local church, serving the local believer with their own language and cultural analogies, while maintaining an unyielding connection to the historical identity of the church.
Wow.
It disarms the technocratic hegemony by simply refusing to assimilate into it. It says, I am not a product of Silicon Valley. I am a tool of the archdiocese.
This has been an incredibly intense journey. Let's synthesize this collision we've been exploring for you today.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
On one side, we have Pope Leo XIV's encyclical Magnifica Humanitas, a profoundly beautiful, deeply terrifying warning against the modern Tower of Babel.
Truly prophetic.
A prophetic demand that we cannot let a technocratic paradigm of efficiency crush human dignity, simulate empathy, or strip us of our moral agency and shared discernment.
And on the other side, we have the highly classified blueprints for Pax AI, a system attempting to use rigid mathematical systems engineering anchor locking, the ACRA linguistic prism, the tri-level ontology, and the identity protocol to safely bottle the divine immutable truths of theology.
It is the ultimate attempt to ensure a 0.000000001% precision in retrieving the truth without losing humanity in the process.
It is an engineering attempt to build a flawless trowel for Nehemiah.
It really is a breathtaking ambition. But, looking at all these sources, analyzing the math against the theology, it leaves me with one final lingering and frankly provocative thought.
Let's hear it.
The Pope warns us continuously and urgently against letting machines govern the truth. We cannot, under any circumstances, surrender our moral judgment or our theological authority to an algorithm.
That is the core warning of the whole encyclical.
But the engineering reality is that Pax AI was built structurally and mathematically to lock itself perfectly and flawlessly to the Vatican's own rules.
Right, it cannot hallucinate.
It cannot deviate from the Code of Canon Law or the Catechism. It is bound by the Arcanum Logicae.
It's mathematically orthodox.
And that is exactly where the ultimate tension lies. So here's the provocative question I want to leave you with to mull over as you look at these two documents.
Okay.
If PAKEX AI is truly mathematically 99.9999999% accurate at reading and applying canon law and the Catechism, what happens when this perfect system catches a human bishop or a human priest making a theological error?
Oh, wow. That is the absolute powder keg.
Right. When the machine is perfectly, unyieldingly anchored to the church's own rules, and the human authority is flawed, biased, tired, or simply wrong, who becomes the ultimate moral authority?
The flawed human with a soul or the flawless machine without one?
Exactly. It is the ultimate test of faith versus engineering.
It really is.
Thank you so much for bringing these incredible, challenging sources to the deep dive. It's been an absolutely fascinating exploration.